Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 74. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and things are heating up in the NBA playoffs as we have four great series going on with, I'm going to be honest, I think every single team thinks they have a legitimate chance to win, and they could all be right. We'll get back on track for sure after a 1-3 ATS record on the last pod with some NBA picks for every game coming up in the next series, as we're still clicking at 41, 25, and 1 overall for my NBA picks on the pod. More on that in a sec. But first, daily odds boost. That sounds awesome to us. From the NBA playoffs to the Stanley Cup playoffs to the MLB, DRF Sportsbook is boosting odds across all your favorite sports daily. Will Kirill Kaprizov score a hat trick for the Wild? Will Kyle Hendricks strike out 8 while towing the rubber for the Cubs? What about Giannis scoring 30 and the Bucks winning? Player props like these are boosted every single day at the DRF Sportsbook, giving you a chance to cash in big. So head over to DRF Sportsbook app or ia.drf.com. Check out the My Bets tab and start betting on some boosts today. Must be physically present in Iowa to wager. So as always on this pod, we do this twice a week. We'll touch base with every single series left in the NBA, give you a look at where it was, where it is, and where it could be going with some game picks for the very next game coming up. Some big boy matchups on Monday night, that's for sure. Plus, betting analyst Matt Russell stops by with his in-depth check-in on the Stanley Cup playoffs, as that has been on fire as of late, even though my Leafs are coming off a tough loss. But we'll get to that. That and more on this episode of the DRF Sports Pod. And luckily for y'all, that starts right about now. And what a wild weekend it continues to be in the NBA playoffs. As for me, I went 1-3 on Thursday's pod. We'll break that down shortly. It's okay. It's all right. I'm not worried. Everything will be all right. But how was your weekend, as I invite on my guy, Mr. Matt Russell, to discuss the NBA playoffs? I know there's some NHL playoff action. Were you into some golf this weekend too? I know you're all over the place. You're all over the place, my dude. How you doing?
I wish I had a max parlay on Sunday. A Verstappen Homa parlay would have cashed pretty nicely, but unfortunately, no, I stayed away from the Formula One. I stayed away from the golf. I've talked about how I'm a big Max Homa fan, so that was sort of fun to watch. With all of the stuff that was going on, was not on the underdog to beat Canelo Alvarez on Saturday night. Like, should have been on top of some of these because I think there was a pretty decent price even on Verstappen, given that he was starting off of the front row. But as far as the stuff that you and I talk about, NBA. 0-2, we'll talk about that on Saturday, and then split yesterday. But the hockey's really started to crank up here. We talked last week about how game ones will make you feel foolish, but sometimes they just allow you to figure out what's going on in these series, right? What are the teams to stay away from? What are the teams that are getting a little undervalued here? And so we'll go series by series and be able to see what's happened in those. Every single one of them, of course, still going on, even though Nashville and Colorado hanging on by a thread. That seems like an inevitable sweep, unfortunately. But yeah, a lot of it is just sort of recon in the early parts of these series, right? We make our bets based on what we think, the value is to start a series. And then it's a lot of recon and are we right? Are we wrong? And how is that fitting in with how the series is playing out? So fun weekend, all in all. I got to hit the links a little bit as well. So yeah, we're right in that mode where it's betting games by night and playing golf by day. So you can't complain.
Good times for sure. And as mentioned, we'll start with the NBA, of course. And, we do the housekeeping off the front end. 1-3, as I mentioned, my picks from last Thursday's pod, 29-21 against the spread in the play-in / playoffs, 41, 25-1 overall for the NBA picks I've been giving out on this pod. And it's been an interesting go because, the way that we come at this, we break down where the game was, where the games are, where they're going, try to give just both of our viewpoints on each game, come out the other side. And I try to give you a pick on what the next game is against the spread in the NBA. And a crazy weekend for sure. But as we record this Monday night, some big boy games for sure. And let's start with the Celtics and Bucks. Game 4 is Monday night. Bucks are at home and favored by 1. And game 4 was insane. I was on Bucks -3 was the spread in that game. Bucks that was a weird game. I'm going to say first off, Bucks end up winning by 2. They don't cover. It was a close game, came right down to the wire, and Giannis and Drew closed this game for the Bucks. It was actually really interesting to watch because one of the things we talked about coming into this series was what would the Bucks do down the stretch without Chris Middleton? We know Giannis is that dude, but still down the stretch, Middleton was a guy who would be involved a lot in the playmaking. Without him, Giannis and Drew seem to be doing all right. But even with that, Marcus Smart almost pulled off one of the craziest plays, missing the free throw on purpose, getting the rebound. Boston had 2 tap-ins, a chance to tie the game. They couldn't do it. Either way, back and forth series continues. As mentioned, the line, Milwaukee -1. I'm going to be on the Bucks again, and it's coming down to what I've been talking about in this theme of said series. I'm just going to keep going with the Bucks when the line is short enough. And I know this is weird because I know one of the things you're going to say, the line went from Bucks -3 to now it's Bucks -1. And it's the same situation. Bucks just at home. It's not like there's someone in or out of the lineup. But the reason why I'm on the Bucks is because the Celtics, I'm going to trust on the Bucks' ability, and Giannis in particular, and even Drew, to get 2s. Yeah. Everything from the Celtics in this series has been coming from the 3-point shot. And that's not something that I'm going to bet money on come playoff time. So I'm going to be on the Bucks in this one, but what's your take so far on this series, where it is and kind of heading into game 4 with this line here, -1?
Yeah. First thing first, right? The bi-weekly updates, the under hits again, under hits again in a Celtics game, right? And it get down to 212, like just the slow molasses-like dropping of these totals, despite the fact that they go under by, frankly, a lot. As far as the matchup is concerned, I'm with you, man. I'm on Milwaukee. They're up 13 points after 3 quarters. Jason Tatum's not doing anything in that game. And you just go, how did this game even get to that point? How did it get to the point where I'm hoping that literally anything other than what happened off of that Marcus Smart missed free throw happens, right? If Milwaukee grabs a rebound, we get a foul and some free throws, right? If the Celtics get the rebound and put the ball back in, we buy ourselves 5 more minutes in order to cover a really short spread. But of course, they have to go full volleyball game situation with the basketball, and no one can sort of, get a decent shot or get possession of it if you're the Bucks. So I'm not going to beat myself up about losing that. That was, of course, one of the 2 that I lost on Saturday, where it's like, yeah, okay, I even grabbed 2.5. I think a lot of people pushed because that actually dropped to 2, which is interesting because, as you mentioned, it goes down to 1 for this game. And I just go, okay, I get it because, you mentioned the shooting, and, we always talk about the shot quality, measurement. And this game was basically 50-50 when it came to shot quality, which is something that we talked about the first 2 games from a shot quality standpoint being about 50-50, except for in game 1, the Celtics made them all and the Bucks didn't make any. And then or vice versa, sorry, but the Bucks made them all and the Celtics didn't make any. And then in game 2, the Celtics made them all and the Bucks didn't. And it turned both of those games individually into blowouts, despite the fact that each team was creating this sort of even amount of, decent shots, right? Yeah. And so they both create them this time around to an equal extent, and they both just miss a ton of them, right? Because both
it was horrible.
But yeah, neither team could make it 3. So I'm still going to go into game 4 with the same handicap of, I still think that the Bucks have a better chance to make their shots, right? And you mentioned like the closing job of Holiday and Giannis. He goes for 42. Can't complain about that. It's like, but it's the other guys, right? I need the other guys to do something. I need the other guys to make some shots. So I'm still on that vibe, so to speak. Again, 13-point lead going into the fourth quarter at home. Like, I would take that every single time. And hopefully we get that chance again. And I think, the Bucks will win a little bit more comfortably this time. And by the way, they don't need to, right? At -1, they just need to. They could win by the exact same circumstance. They could have a full bump set spike situation happening off of that missed free throw, and we'd still get there. So yeah, I'll be back on Milwaukee. And of course, the under still at 212, still in the 210s for a series that just doesn't seem like it should be that high. And it hasn't been.
Yeah, it's strange, right? It's a strange series because at the end of it, both of those teams, as you mentioned, shot terribly from 3. But when I look at the Celtics, it's like, okay, well, Jason Tatum was bad, 4 of 19. Al Horford only took 2 less shots than Jason Tatum. That's a weird thing that Jason Tatum only took 19 shots in that game, finished with 10 points, and they almost won, right? But you're looking at contributions. They got Al Horford in the year 2022, went for 22 and 16 in that game. Like, he's had a great resurgence with the Celtics, but if that's really what you're relying on, that's not a good look if you're the Boston Celtics. Meanwhile, it's ugly for Drew Holiday. But this is something I talk about a lot in the playoffs, right? Where you look at someone's stats and it says 11 for 30 for 25 points, but it's not, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's you're looking at it and it's not telling you the full truth of the matter. Drew Holiday knows that without Middleton, he has to score at least 20 plus, right? Yeah. So however many shots he's going to put up, he's going to get there. And then of course, crunch time, he gets it done. It's just it was almost like a road performance for the Bucks, right? Yeah. Where their stars just carried them through. But bottom line, we're both on the Bucks going forward in that series, as again, Milwaukee leads the series 2-1. Can they extend it to 3-1? I mean, Boston would be in big time trouble if that happens. We'll see how that plays out for sure. The other game that people are very interested in seeing how that plays out, Warriors and Grizzlies. This series took a huge turn, and it started off one way, and the way that the series started off was with hard fouls and the teams drawing back and forth and a lot of trash talking, a lot of quote unquote bad blood, for lack of a better term, to use a cliche term. But there's been some spice in this series, right? When you add everything all up, the latest thing being Ja Morant's injury, which is its own weird subplot where I don't even know what Jordan Poole was doing, but I don't think that he injured Ja Morant on that play either. I just think it's a convenient thing for all the Grizz to be mad at. Either way, Warriors win in a blowout. The only game I got right from last week's pod. And it was just based off when the Warriors win, they're going to win in that like blowout way where they're front running, everyone's celebrating. But here's the weird thing now. We go forward to game 4 tonight. Yeah. Warriors are favored by 10 points. Ja Morant is not expected to play in this game. 10 points is a lot. It really is. But I'm sticking with the Warriors win. They win in blowouts theory. And with no Ja Morant, yes, Memphis has played well this season without Ja Morant. But I just think this is a whole different beast, having to do it in the playoffs in Golden State. In this scenario where a veteran team like Golden State should smell blood, up 2-1, the other team star players down, you got to go for kill shots in this game. And I just see it's another Steph, Clay, Draymond all running down the floor, celebrating, wolfing up the crowd. Warriors win easy. That's what I'm looking at here. I don't know what's your take, my dude?
Well, okay. So definitively Ja Morant is out for this game. Just want to double check on that because I'm looking at this line, and this, we talk about this sort of halfway line, right? And if this is the line, then this is a 3-point adjustment off of a blowout, off of Ja Morant being out for this game. So are we saying here that Ja Morant is only worth 3 points? because, this got to 7. I talked about how I wanted Memphis +7. Great news. I got Memphis +7. Bad news. Did not come remotely close to covering. So I just look at it. I go, like, I'm kind of with you. And I'm like, is this only a 3-point adjustment? Because he might play, like we saw all of a sudden Joel Embiid's, playing 36 minutes, or is this, sort of a halfway adjustment because we're not positive, you can say somebody's even not going to play and then he's, can play. There's, you don't go to jail for lying about whether somebody, or not even lying, but, changing your mind about somebody.
Well, the Sixers took a fine, right?
For a game.
The Sixers took a fine for not following the protocols.
But like,
and that's nothing to them.
Like,
who cares?
But they'll take that at this, at this point in the season. So, I mean, if that's the case, like -10 does feel a little bit short after all of that, right? But for me, I'm sort of looking at the total here and seeing the points scored in that game. Now, obviously, there was a ton of points scored, but same thing with the shot quality. The shot quality indicated that there should have been like 130 some odd points in that game. So it wasn't just like incredible shot making, of which there was some. But is there reason to bet the over with the personnel changes that have happened in this series, right? With Gary Payton second out, the Warriors are now sort of have to look at these games and go, you know what? We're just going to have to outscore Memphis at this point because we don't have anybody to guard Ja. Now, if Ja's not in the game, that obviously changes things. But from a mindset standpoint, the Warriors are just like, all right, let's just go like hyperspeed here and put up the type of volume of shots that is going to lend itself to an over that still isn't ridiculously high at this point. It's 224.5, right? That's very doable. Now, again, if you take points off for whatever people think the difference is for Ja Morant being out of this game, then okay, I see how this could drop a little bit. But a lot of it more has to do with, the defensive output that the Warriors are putting into a game. And you just mentioned Memphis being pretty good this season without Ja. Now, does that mean that they're going to be able to win this game? Like, no, but like they can still score points. This isn't a team that's just going to roll out there and score like 88 points because Ja's not around. So I look at it and I go, okay, like maybe the over is the play because at 10, like now, if I'm telling you that -10 is still short on the Warriors, that's just not really a comfortable place I want to be, right? I'm not dying to lay 10 points in an NBA basketball game, like at any time really. And certainly not in the second round of the playoffs, trying to judge like how many points Ja Morant, means to the Memphis Grizzlies, knowing that they have this really good record when he's not playing, right? That feels like, just sort of a fool's errand going in and just being like, yeah, -10, I'll take it, especially in a desperation type situation here that the Grizzlies should be in now, facing the idea of going down 3-1. So I don't really want anything to do with the spread in this one. If anything, I would play the over. Again, wait to make sure that Ja's out of the game out of this game and see where the total ends up. Because if the over adjustment is in the total coming down, knowing the sort of new framework that the Warriors have to play under, knowing that they don't have a defensive element the way that they do in Gary Payton II, I think the over is probably the play after all things sort of shake down here.
Yeah. I mean, the Warriors, again, like I just think the way that they're playing in this and the way that, you could talk me into taking the Grizz +10. It's just, that's not a place that I want to be at against the Warriors at all in the playoffs and the way that they front run. I'll be the sucker here sitting here. I'm on the Warriors -10 in the playoffs. Let's get it. 2 more games to go as each series is super interesting. The Heat and Sixers now tied at 2. Mentioned Joel Embiid making his triumphant return. And in these series, as mentioned, the Warriors and Grizzlies was the only game I got right. Boston at least was a close cover for the Bucks than for me picking the Bucks in that one. I'll be honest with you guys. I was way off on the Heat and Sixers series, as well as the Mavs and Suns series. And it's very interesting, right? Joel Embiid makes his triumphant return. We talked about how Joel Embiid might be one to be playing up said injuries, right? We did kind of talk about that, his ability to come back, get hyped up from the crowd. And he did that. Game 3 was a 20-point blowout. Game 4 was a lot closer. And I look at this series and think about how much has changed since Joel Embiid comes back. He comes back. Kyle Lowry is out there limping around, and I don't know how much he's actually helping the Heat in game 4 as he was limping around and missing every single shot he took. I look at this game though, and as I look at game 4, because game 4 is probably more indicative of what reality could be, like best case scenario for the Sixers. Game 3, I think, was just a blowout. Embiid's back. Cool. We're hyped. We're happy. Cool. Game 4, though, was really close. And I'll say this, and I'm tiptoeing around how I say this, because we'll get into this with the next game as well. When people say they don't like watching the NBA, I really understand what they're talking about, because there are just plays in the NBA where you're just like, yo, man, what are the refs on right now? Like, Embiid is getting foul calls, like Bam's getting foul calls on him when he's just like battling for position with Embiid. And it's like, what do you want him to do? Right? Like they're literally just battling for position, and you could call that every single time down the floor, unless you're just going to let Embiid get the ball wherever he wants, but they're whistling fouls. And every time in game 4, when you watch that game and the Heat were pushing and pushing and pushing, credit where credit's due, Harden just got fouled and got to the line and got free throws. If I'm a Sixers fan, happy to see James Harden finally, show some signs of, hey, I'm that guy, or I'm at least a guy. But those guys were getting a bunch of calls, and it really was big. And it's a thing that me and you have talked about a lot. The road team, what happens with their role players on the road. I mean, Miami shot 7 for 30 from 3 in game 3, 7 for 35 from 3 in game 4.
Right.
That's not going to cut it. I expect that to flip going back to Miami, and Miami in game 5, Heat favored by 3.5 points. You know me, I'm not the one to be swayed too much by the roller coaster of a playoff series. I can admit when I'm wrong, and the series is now tied at 2. I said I didn't see the series going past 5. We're obviously going past 5, and I'm on Miami in game 5, Heat minus 3.5. There's not much that I've seen in this series that is going to like drastically change my opinion on things. I just think, on the road, the Embiid, and we've seen this, Embiid and Harden aren't going to get the same calls on the road that they did at home. And Miami's role players aren't going to shoot as terribly on the road as they did. So we're talking game 5, give me Heat minus 3.5.
I mean, some people would call it stubborn. You're like, I'm not going to be swayed. I was like, some people call it. We talked about this.
Swayed by James Harden. Like,
I know,
come on, man. I'm too familiar with James Harden's work to be fooled by one 30-point game, and the whole internet's going crazy because my guy dropped 30 once in the playoffs. Come on, bro.
I get it. Plus 600 though was looking pretty good, right? Plus 600 is looking pretty good right now. You can do stuff with if you're holding that plus 600 ticket that I talked about last week on the Sixers, right? You can make some moves as this series is now tightened right up from a money line standpoint. Minus 3.5. Okay, let's do some quick, point spread analysis here, right? First and foremost, it was 7.5 without Joel Embiid. It's 3.5 now. That's a 4-point adjustment. You go, okay. We just compare it to Morant. We compare it to Doncic in the last round, right? Where we sort of talked about how 5 to 5.5 points for even the most ardent, most important guy. Joel Embiid feels really important because the drop off to whoever's playing when Joel Embiid is not in the lineup, because Doc Rivers is so committed to the idea of this is my 5-man. And I am playing this player because he is on my bench. I'm playing DeAndre Jordan because I need somebody who is going to look like Joel Embiid, at least from a physicality standpoint, right? He's not going outside the box and going I'm going to go really small and see what happens. He's no, I'm just still going to put a big man out there. And so the difference is pronounced a lot more because there isn't a way to sort of make up the ground, right? Somehow the only way to make up the ground for Doc Rivers is to literally get Joel Embiid back in the lineup. And so, the game 3, especially with Embiid coming back, was predictable as far as the Sixers going to be able to win that game. We talked about the idea okay, this line is toggling back and forth because nobody knows whether he's going to play or not. The tricky one was buying back in for game 4, knowing that, okay, we see all the time, the gentleman's sweep, the one game often happens at home in game 3. Game 4 was the one that was always going to be the trickiest one. And so I tweeted, the game picks out yesterday for hockey and basketball. And I had Philly yesterday, and it's because I think these two teams, when Embiid is healthy and playing, and I'm not even saying like 100%, I just think these two teams are really equal. And so first and foremost, you have to look when teams are relatively equal or are dead equal. These lines are going to be -3 on either side, right? Like that's the home court advantage. And you saw it -2 for Philadelphia because the concept was that the Heat are the better team. And so, it's basically a point better. Philly wins both those games and we come back to Miami, and now it's down to, okay, I guess Miami's only a half point better than Philadelphia. I just look at it and I go, yeah, I agree with that now. Had we had these full roster teams, and that includes Kyle Lowry, that includes, Embiid, and if everybody was healthy, it goes back to the regular season where you had all of these teams jockeying for the 1 through 4, 1 through 5 positions. If you sort of include the Nets conceptually in that, all these teams are kind of equal. Like we saw this throughout the regular season, right? We had to sell ourselves on the Boston Celtics. And then all of a sudden, like they're the favorites to like make it out of the East about halfway through this playoff so far. And so I kind of just want to take the points if you're giving me anything more than 3.5 when any of these 4 teams in the East are playing against each other, right? Like the reason we're taking the favorite, I shouldn't say the reason, but like one of the ways that we're allowing ourselves to take the favorite with Milwaukee is because we're down to -1 in this situation. As much as we think that Milwaukee should have won that game relatively comfortably, if I had to do it over again, like these teams just gravitate to sort of equality. And we saw that in the first halves of those games in Miami. And I just think with Embiid in the lineup, that first half can become the full game because you're getting 36 minutes out of an actual center that should be playing in the NBA. And not just that, but an MVP candidate. And so I don't like Joel Embiid any more than you do. I don't like the Sixers team or Harden any more than you do. But if you're going to give me the 3.5 points, I could see Philadelphia going in to Miami and winning that game, because we saw them play well enough in a small sample size that I think because of getting the minutes out of Embiid now that you're going to get, I think you can extrapolate that out to a potentially close game. And in this situation, I don't know that 4 points is enough of a flip for Joel Embiid. I just think that he's probably more valuable than that because of what DeAndre Jordan is going to give you, what Paul Millsap is going to have to give you for 48 minutes. And it wouldn't be as valuable. Maybe he'd be 4, maybe he'd be 3, maybe he'd be 2 points, except for Doc Rivers is totally handcuffed by himself, right? On not being able to make adjustments to cut into that issue. He's not. The good news is he's got his guy back. Again, road game. I'm not really all that afraid of the Miami crowd or that atmosphere in Miami. I'm leaning to the +3.5 here because, again, it might be a half point, might even be a point of value. That's still something, right? That's still something for me, and I think I have to go that direction.
I think the home court goes I know the normal way we look at it is okay, well, is Philly going to be afraid to play in Miami? No, of course not. But I think the Miami dudes like Tyler Hero, nowhere to be found in front of that Philly crowd, right?
Yeah.
Things become a lot nicer in Miami on South Beach if your name's Tyler Hero, right? And your big coming out party was in the bubble, right? During the playoffs. Right. The confines of playing in Miami might be a little bit better. Sorry.
Well, but the gap there, right, is they need to go from getting blown out in game 3 to 10-point loss essentially in game 4 to their requirement is to go from that, play better, and win, right? Mm-hmm. And our request by betting them -3.5 is to go from blowout 10-point loss to win relatively comfortably, right? They have to surpass even their own goals in this case. Whereas with a Boston, Milwaukee, when we reference it, the goal is literally just to win because the spread is -1, right? And it'll go back to Boston. And this is I keep going back to it because I think it's still the most interesting series. If Milwaukee's -1 here, think about the 6-point flip. Does that mean Boston's going to be -5 in game 5? Like, I just don't see how that's going to be the case. Like, I think that series has sort of devolved to a point where they're like, you know what, it's kind of like -1, -2 on both sides, and the home court advantage in Boston, Milwaukee has tightened up where it's like maybe a 2-point flip on either side. And I just think that probably should be a plus in Miami, where instead of flipping home court 3 points either way, we should get to a point where honestly either team who's at home should be favored by 2. It should be really just a bucket. And so again, I just think there's probably a point worth of value here still, because we're in our mind's eye, we're thinking of the Philadelphia team that went to Miami in the first 2 games and, wasn't all that competitive in the second half. But this is different, right? And we can get into like a momentum conversation too, but like at least Philly believes now, right? There's some belief element to this team.
Yeah. And there's a way that points get shifted from one place to the next, right? Like, I don't expect Joel Embiid to shoot the same amount of free throws as field goal attempts on the road as he does at home. Yeah. Right. Like, those guys he gets a lot of shots. He gets a lot, right? But there's just spiciness, we'll say, that happens in the NBA from time to time. And Embiid and Harden did their job, right? They got to the line. They got, and it's a really important thing in the NBA that gets done from vets. And you saw Harden do it a bunch in that game, where the game is getting tight, the game is getting close, the comeback is on. How do I get to the free throw line to like stop the run? Miami cuts it to like 4. Harden just barreling in, and he's not trying to score. He's trying to get to the free throw line. And that's just, smart playoff basketball. Yeah. Credit where credit's due to Harden and Embiid. Very interested to see how that game 5 goes for sure. And very interested to see how the next game 5 goes, as well as the Mavs and Suns, another series that went from 2-0 to 2-2. And I mean, if I'm talking about foul calls, I mean, Chris Paul fouled out in that game. And this is why people hate the NBA. Chris Paul had 4 first half fouls in that game. Yeah. Mind you, Monty shouldn't leave him in the game to pick up his 4th foul, especially once you start seeing some of the fouls that were being called on Chris Paul in that game. And like, for the record, right? I had nothing on the Suns. I had nothing on that game, like the Suns game 4 or the Philly game 4. I had nothing on either of those 2 games, right? So this isn't even about like, I lost money and I'm like, at least 3 of those foul calls on Chris Paul, 3 of the 6 were just horrible calls, just horrible calls. And if you have, and if you don't even give the opportunity for the Chris Paul 4th quarter to even like be a thing in a game that was kind of close. Right. Like as a referee, you have drastically altered the outcome of that game. And I don't know if you need to call fouls on Chris Paul and Luka both jumping for a rebound and Luka flopping. I don't know if you need to call a foul there. You could just not blow your whistle. 2 guys jumping for the ball and Chris Paul, the way smaller guy, fouls Luka. Like, what are we doing? You even have Luka laughing, saying, "Hey, I learned the flopping from you." Right. So like, it's insane. Either way, series tied at 2. We have a series. Another thing we talked about from the Dallas series in comparison to what was going on in the Bucks and Celtics series was the 3-point shooting. And I talked about how I didn't think Dallas would be able to hit the same threes in this series that they were able to get against the Jazz. And hey, game 4, they hit 23s. Yeah. I can say I was wrong there, right? Credit where credit's due to Dallas. They banged in those threes. The other guys were hitting shots. It wasn't even all Luka in that series. And as the series now, flips back to Phoenix for a game 5, it's Suns -6. That's a lot of points. That is a lot of points. But again, might say I'm stubborn. I'm on the Suns. And the reason I'm going to be on the Suns in this game is just because if Dallas came out, this is a classic NBA playoff scenario where Dallas's role players at home in front of the crowd were hyped up. They were fired up. I mean, they're standing on the bench. I don't know if you saw that whole thing about a memo sent out to the Mavs about how their bench was too like standing up and too close to the court. Like they were told to like back up. So if you watch the start of game 4, I think it was, Mark Cuban decided that he was going to join the team on the sidelines, standing up and being even more closer to the court, kind of as an FU, which is just like very classic old school Mark Cuban, but also just a sign that we're here. We're in the playoffs, right? This series has gotten real spicy. Heading back to Phoenix, as mentioned, I'm on the Suns -6, and I know that it's a lot of points, but I just think Suns bounce back. The Dallas role players, again, do it on the road. Home court matters a lot.
Yeah.
And it's the same. Sorry, it's the same thing as Philly, where like you see how great those role players played at home. And now I'm going to remove that when they go on the road.
Yeah. First of all, your boy Cubes very much on a Lewis Hamilton vibe as far as like overcompensating whenever somebody sort of threatens to get, find them or whatever. You saw Lewis Hamilton, they put not a ban, but a limit on how much jewelry one can wear. And Lewis Hamilton showed up to a press conference wearing 5 watches, like 11 necklaces, and like 10 rings. That's basically Mark Cuban. I'm surprised he didn't have 5 watches on the sideline. Yeah, man, you mentioned the supporting cast, right? 8 threes from Dorian Finney-Smith. Like really 8, like stop it. So I missed basically most of the first half of this game. I got in sort of, a little bit late from being on the course yesterday. And then I walk in, I turn the game on, and they're like, Chris Paul with his 4th foul. I'm like, what? Like, come on. Because honestly, like, yeah, the Mavs got out to a start in that game. And listen, I clear avoided that game, that this series in game 3, knowing that if this wasn't going to be a sweep, right? If we're doing the gentleman's sweep thing, that Mavs were going to get game 3. And I gave, them a little, had a little more faith in the Mavs in game 3 than I did even the Sixers, which is why like the Sixers, I was like, all right, let's just put a little on the old plus 600 here to see if we can dig up a series out of this. And we have. I don't know that we've even necessarily dug up a series out of this other than maybe the landscape. You look around and you go, okay, like Memphis, Golden State, like that looks to be a pretty quick one. I think we probably got to make this series 2-2. Like if I was a conspiracy theorist, that's what I would think about that, especially after you tell me that those free throws were so sketchy.
You know, I'm not one. I hate the Raptors Twitter fan base that is like the refs. But like one of the Chris Paul fouls where him and Luka jumping for a ball, Luka falls on the ground. That's one foul. Another foul was Chris Paul dribbling the ball up the floor and Brunson's on his back and Chris Paul slows up. A play that Chris Paul does all the time and is always a defensive foul. Yeah. But they called it an offensive foul. And it's like, you've never called that an offensive foul in Chris Paul's entire career. But you choose this game to call that an offensive foul. It's just like, come on. And if anything, it's a no call. It's not an offensive foul.
Of course. Yeah.
Right?
He tries it 10,000 times. It never works, or like rarely works, but it certainly never gets called on him.
And then he fouled out. The one he fouled out on, it's like, is that a foul? Sure. But you're not fouling out a Hall of Famer in the playoffs on that play where Brunson just misses a layup. Like, it's just like, what are we doing here? Right. That's when people watch the games and they're like, something's up here. Right. Yeah. So even when they were down 10, I was still like, okay, I still think Phoenix is actually going to win this game. But the problem is like you mentioned, we don't get the second half, the fourth quarter, like Chris Paul effect in all of this. And so now we flip it back to Phoenix, and let's remember what the lines were when the games were in Phoenix. They were -6. I think there was even maybe some -6.5 in there at some point. And Phoenix won all of those games comfortably and covered relatively comfortably. Game 1 got a little sketchy at the end, even though they were up like 18 points with like 5 minutes to go. That got super tight. And there was actually a shot attempt to backdoor us there. But effectively, nothing has changed, right? It's not like there's anybody in and out of the lineup and all of that sort of thing. So, yeah, I understand why the number is the same. And I understand why the number can be the same, because Dallas just won 2 games. So you're not going to come back and adjust Phoenix at home up to 7, up to 7.5 or something, the way that if there had just been a third straight game and we had, and these game 3 and 4 was just wiped from our memory, like
then you would adjust it because Phoenix won those games so comfortably. So I don't think that Dallas found anything to sort of change the sort of chemistry with regards to this series. I think they just had Dorian Finney-Smith making threes and Chris Paul fouling out. And I just don't think either of those things are going to happen once we get to a game 5. Now, is there other ways they could still have a good shooting game across the board? But like, even when Luka was putting up 40 plus points, they still weren't covering in Phoenix here. So I think you just literally men in black yourself to forget these 3 and 4 games of the series and just take Phoenix again. Take Phoenix again anytime they're at home. Now, I don't know honestly, it looks a lot like the last series, where it's going to be Phoenix wins game 5, then they go on the road in game 6 and they clear it up, in game 6, right? They finish it all out in game 6. And so,
Chris
the question
Paul
is
brings
this
some security for his family in game 6 in Dallas.
A full team. So I just think like small blip along the way here that we have seen before with regards to the Suns, in conjunction with the Warriors looking seemingly to be handling Memphis. And we're right back to the situation where Phoenix is available, better than plus 300 to win the championship. Something that, again, if it's better than plus 300 along the road through the playoffs, just go ahead and hit it. Hit it again if you want to. I am not worried about the Phoenix Suns here. I think they're going to make the finals comfortably, and I think they win the next 2 games, and I think they cover in game 5.
There's something that I'm not going to say into a microphone, but I will tell you it after the pod that I need to remember. It's stored in my memory bank. Some behind the scenes. Yeah. Anyways.
Okay.
To recap.
Never mind.
No. To recap though, here's my picks for the next game coming up. Monday night, game 4. Give me the Bucks -1. Game 4 with the Warriors. Give me Warriors -10. Tuesday night, game 5s. I got the Heat -3.5 and the Suns -6. Just realized I'm on all the favorites. I don't know if that's a good thing, a good place to be, but hey, that's where we're at here. That's where we're at. We'll get back to the pod in a sec, but first, be a pro and win. Introducing DRF Sports all-new premium data feature on drf.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is just $8.25 a month, you can get industry-leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With so many big sporting events here, it's the best way for you to make some money this postseason and have fun while doing it. That's DRF Sports Pro. Sign up now at drf.com/sports. Switching gears though here, and I know we've been doing a little NHL recap as there's been it's been a very interesting first round in the NHL playoffs, to say the least. I mean, I'm still a little bit hurt from watching my Maple Leafs have a tough go at it in game 4, I'll say, but
let's talk about it. Let's talk it out, man. How you feeling?
Not surprised. No, not so. Okay. I mean, listen, the energy I was on yesterday going into that game, the group text was ablaze, and I was like, I'll be stunned if the Leafs win this game, just because. Sure. Yeah. Until they win a series, like, you got to show me that you're gonna win before I talk myself into, oh yeah, they're going to come out and they're going to dominate Tampa in Tampa to put a stranglehold on this series against the defending champs. When both networks in Canada here keep showing the same stats, shoving it down your throat. Vasilevsky after a loss, 16-0, blah, 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 save percentage this much. And it's like, yeah, we get it. They won the last 2 cups. Like, when you won the last 2 cups, chances are you didn't really lose many games in a row, right? Like, I'm just going out on a limb and guessing. True.
Yeah, we're gonna find some positive things to say about you if you've won 2 Stanley Cups.
But seriously though, right? Like, this is I laugh sometimes with some of the number stuff, and it's like, yeah, no shit. They won. Can I swear on this pod? I don't know if I can do that. But anyways, like, if you won back to, do you know what I'm saying though? Like, these stats sometimes it's just like, yeah, they won back-to-back Stanley Cups. I'm gonna guess that they probably didn't lose a lot of games in a row. Just going out on a limb with that guess.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're 100% right. It is also kind of an incredible stat, but the great thing about your Leafs, man, is that they won the first game. so they can win this series without the Lightning losing 2 games in a row, right? Like that was the key to the whole thing. And not that was the plan all along, but like, if you read my stuff, if you listen to what we talked about on, Monday's NHL preview pod, this series is going 7, right? The series is going 7. The Maple Leafs will have home ice advantage in game 7. Like this is just how it's going to go, right? And you were going to get the game 1 split or the game 1-2 split. You are going to get the game 3-4 split. I thought Tampa would actually get potentially game 3 instead of game 4, but like easiest bet in the world to make after they lost game 3 at home. And again, because these teams are so like tight as far as like they're really equal. And the funny thing about this series is that every game has been a quote unquote domination from a goal scoring standpoint. But we always talk about, right, like the goal scoring is just the puck going into the net. It isn't necessarily driving play, right? And so the whole theme of this series is not as bad as you think. Right. So the Lightning get trucked in game 1 wasn't as bad as you think, right? Because obviously there was a lot of special teams play, And then game 2, right? Tampa comes back and they win. And like that wasn't as bad as you'd think for Leafs fans. And then Leafs win game 3. And again, looks bad for the Lightning. But I'm here to tell you the predictive metrics in that game, 12-3 high danger chances at even strength for the Lightning in game 3, right? Now the Leafs convert and they get on the power play and they score there. And you know what I mean? And all of a sudden, because we get sort of obsessed with the actual goals in these games, the fun part is over the course of a series, we get a ton of information at even strength. And so while these games should be going to overtime because the teams are playing really equally, the sort of outlier situation is that just like one team scores all the goals in each of these games, even though they're getting a relatively equal amount of scoring chances. And in this case for game 4, the first goal happens a minute in. Like they still have the starting lineup graphic up on the screen, and there's already a goal in the net. And like I got, there's a certain website out there that cashes out your money line if you go up 3 goals. That game started at 7:15. My money line cashed out at 7:30. Like that, that never happens. I mean, I guess it could have when Colorado played Nashville, but I digress. And so like, how could we have seen this coming? Well, like the narrative is that Tampa Bay never loses 2 games in a row. The predictive metrics say, okay, they were 12-3 in high danger chances at even strength. The narrative and the metrics like melded together to give us Tampa Bay in game 4. And yeah, like I sort of facetiously say, yeah, this is going 7. Like the Leafs are going to win game 5. The Lightning are going to win game 6. And it's going to go to game 7. And at that point, you're put to a decision, because if you're sitting there with the Leafs series price, okay, that's probably going to mirror the money line. But if you're sitting there, as we talked about, the Leafs to win in 7, you've got a plus 500 ticket. You're going to be able to get off of that if you don't want it, if you do not believe in the Leafs, right? And that was the whole point. And so all of this, and I don't usually do this because normally we try to find value on one side, and we'll get to a bunch of series that we have that in. And then you just sort of play that. It's either, team X or nothing. In this series, it's been relatively easy to kind of predict, okay, like this team on this day, this team on that day. And if you try to do that with every series, a lot of the times you're going to find yourself in trouble, because you can go 0-6, 0-7 in a series when you're trying to make those types of game-to-game predictions. In this series, it has been a lot easier to be like, yeah, this is clearly a Tampa game. This is clearly going to be a Toronto game. So game 5 is clearly going to be a Toronto game. And because these teams are so evenly matched, again, it hasn't shown that way in the first games, or excuse me, in these first 4 games from a goal standpoint. We're also still getting really tight money lines. So it's not the situation where you're like, oh, this team is like a really high probability win, but I have to lay -200 or -160. Like there's still enough faith in both of these teams that they're kind of like -120 in every game, whoever's at home. And so you're basically at a pick 'em, which has been really nice because you don't have to deal with any of the extraneous accounting stuff. Like Toronto's -130 in game 5. Like, I'm not going to say I'm positive that Toronto's going to win the game, but like, I kind of am, and then at minus 130, right? Like, I think that's just going to be a really good bet. And so, give me my Toronto minus 130, because I look, and even the metrics in this game wasn't that bad, but because Tampa gets 3 goals so quickly, as a Leafs fan, you're immediately deflated. Oh, we got smoked, blah, 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 blah. Now things got mega weird late in the game, and you end up with a bizarre 7-3 score, and there's like Leafs are scoring, the Lightning are answering with empty net goals, and it's like that gets all crazy. And just as another example of why you can never use goal differential to sort of decide who the better team is, because like that wasn't a 4-goal blowout. It just so happened that the early pucks went in the net for Tampa Bay, and you as a fan felt really bad about the game for a very long time. And so when that sort of emotional element creeps in, if you had bet on the Leafs, for example, like you would feel like they got blown out because the pucks went in the net so quickly in that game. But you're allowed to play 60 minutes, and you're allowed to play, we're up to 240 minutes in this series, 75 to 80% of which have been at even strength. And the metrics are borderline identical for both of these teams. Tampa Bay has been slightly better, which shouldn't be that surprising because of how much Toronto took advantage of special team stuff in game 1. But fundamentally, from a predictive standpoint, we're looking at a 52 to 48% type of a series, right? This isn't some sort of domination, because either team is taking turns dominating on the scoreboard. And that hasn't exactly been the same thing when it comes to even strength. So we're eventually going to get one of these overtime games. And honestly, there's going to be a point where maybe it's game 5, where you need an overtime win to settle a bet. It just hasn't happened with this series. And I hope it does this, because I'm having fun betting this game to game and have a lot of these bets basically decided through 2 periods, even though these teams are still really, really close when it comes to what they're doing on the ice.
Yeah, it's been super interesting series to watch go back and forth. And I'm assuming the back and forth affair will continue. I don't know how the old ticker here will handle this going to game 7. And Leafs, just can never make it easy. Someone tweeted out last night, and this is like the life of a Toronto fan. Someone tweeted out, they were like, I guess there was only one Toronto athlete that had the mentality of bleep it, let's go get 2, right? When you're going on the road.
Sure.
The man was Kawhi Leonard. I'll never let Toronto fans forget the man, the myth, the legend that was Kawhi Leonard. What a year. What a 30 for 30 that's going to make in like 20 years. It's like that forgotten championship, right? It's like, wait, what happened? Speaking of, hey, what happened? Boston, Carolina. There's a lot of other series going on in the NHL for sure. A lot of different ways we can go here, but I feel like this Boston, Carolina series has just been insane. Like the variance and just of, when you think one thing's happening and then the next happens, and then you got Pasta and his crew going fuego again. And it's like, where have I seen this before? Yeah. They just look unstoppable. Where are you at with this series right now?
Well, we're back to even, right? Like we had Boston as the short underdog in those first 2 games. We lost them both, and both of them were incredibly frustrating because Boston, certainly in game 1, was the better team. And then the Bruins, and again, predictive metrics, right? We go, okay, let's head back to Boston here. The line, we're getting some value because of the down 0-2, the fact that they lost those first 2 games and looked bad doing it. So we got Boston at home at like minus 130 type prices. And so Boston's just the better team here. And I get that they didn't win the first 2 games, but like you have to commit to this. And it could have gotten ugly quick if Boston had lost both those games. But when you think Boston's going to potentially sweep and they get swept, you probably deserve to lose a couple of units along the way, right? But in this case, it's a little bit more appropriate than we thought. And now we're back to even because we get our couple of units back on Boston here. There's still the chance that Boston minus 1.5 for the series price comes in with Boston winning the next 2. And I honestly don't see why they couldn't, right? Because they were the better team at even strength in those first 2 games in Carolina. And strangely enough, that line was plus 105, plus 110. Now we're up to plus 120 for the Bruins on the road against Carolina. Again, what has changed, right? Predictive metrics, even strength, Boston was better. on the scoreboard, Carolina is looked at as taking care of business at home. But that's just not how this played out, right? And so I'm going to be on Boston again. Might as well go for a fifth time, right? I've got them. I'm comparing them to Newman out there, right? Where I'm sitting there. You know, we basically swept the board. I think it was Thursday, with the exception of the Bruins. So luckily we came back, we got those 2 wins, and now we can sort of see this through, you know, a little bit clearer eyes. So why wouldn't I bet game 5 at a better price than 1 and 2 are available, and something that still is consistent with us having Boston -1.5. Now, if you have Boston -1.5, like, you can sit back, hope they win this game, because I think we're going to get Boston, a victory in game 6 back at home, right? When it comes to the taking care of business element, I think Boston is that team. I don't think Carolina is that team. So Boston +120, I think, is incredible value given where we are with regards to this series. You've got the series price still, you've got -1.5. There's plenty to sort of, have in this series, but I just think the value is too much. I'm going to press it here with Boston +120 in game 5 against Carolina.
I have a very simple question. How much trouble is Florida in?
Man, that's a really good one, because I don't even know what the answer to that is. This has been one that, because I saw so much value in Florida, but because the price was so high and I understand it's hockey, I haven't bet any of these games yet, thinking that maybe it's time to hop in on Florida at some point. And then, game 2 happens, and we were expecting better out of Florida. We got better out of Florida, but not as much as I would have liked. And then game 3 comes around and they score first and then give up 6 consecutive goals to finish the game, unanswered goals, as the kids say. And I look at the metrics here, and we'll run through it real quick here. The expected goals in this series: Florida 6.81, Washington 6.44. So Florida has had, and 29-25 in high danger chances at even strength. So Florida has been the sort of quote unquote better team at even strength, but not to the point where we should be laying -175s on the road or laying -250s at home, right? Florida could have a 2-1 series lead in this series theoretically, and it still wouldn't be value enough based on the predictive metrics here. So I went from a point where I'm like, I'd like to hop in where possible on Florida and I don't want anything to do with Washington, to a point where I kind of understand if people are betting Washington, and kudos to those who have thus far, but there wasn't anything from the regular season or even the last 2 or 3 playoff runs that would indicate that Washington had the gumption for this, right? They have lost in more drastic, easier fashion to worse teams than the Florida Panthers. And so this just is a question of, does the cream rise to the top in the Florida Panthers? Do they get it together? Because this is a team that should be playing at a, if we sort of extrapolated win probability, they should be playing at a 60% or above win probability rate. And right now they're playing at a 51% win probability rate, and the variance is getting them here, right? They are getting scooped by the variance, where Washington has been able to take a 2-1 series lead. So I am just hands off on this series. I'm sort of letting it play out, and it's fascinating to watch. But I just don't know what to make of it. And honestly, with 8 series, and if you don't know what to make out of 1 or 2 of them, you don't have to play them. There's plenty of games on every day.
Yeah, super interesting stuff going on there for sure. And I don't really know which one is the bigger underdog, but I know that the Flames obviously were Stanley Cup favorites. And now you look at this series and you're like, wait a second, is Dallas really out here giving them a real go? Should Calgary be worried?
Yeah. And I thought so before the series started. And it's funny, there's 2 series right now, and they're sort of congruent but in different ways, right? One, that last East series, the Rangers and the Bruins, and the Rangers and the Penguins, and the Stars and the Flames. And those are 2 that I've sort of planted my flag outside of the Bruins series, where I'm like, I'm betting the Penguins. The Penguins are the better team. And in this case with Dallas, I understand that the Flames are the better team, but I need to bet Dallas in every one of these games because I think it's too drastic, right? So I'm basically, I'm on one side in virtually every game, but for different reasons. One is a value play because I think the team is much better, and the other is a value because I don't think they are as bad as the other team, is. So in the case of Dallas and Calgary, The good news is you're getting plus 200s on the road. You're getting plus 150s at home. And we hit 2 out of 3 so far. Mm-hmm. And again, predictive metrics. We looked at game 1, the Flames win 1-0. We talked about, was it a situation where the Stars blew it? Well, this is a veteran Stars team that have been to a Stanley Cup final in the last 3 years, the bubble team. And all of these guys are still around. Now, have they all lost a step? Maybe, especially in in the case of some of the top guys. But predictive metrics in game 1, 0.87 to 0.77 for for Calgary in the expected goals with a 3-3 high danger chance. Game 2 comes around, the Stars win, and it was 1.39 to 1.14. Incredibly tight, actually, in favor of Calgary, and the high danger chances were 5-5. We shift focus to Dallas. We're still getting plus 150. And then things get crazy in that game. 16-16 in high danger chances at even strength in that game. And the expected goals were 2.28 to 2.21. So, Shell, we're sitting here through 3 games, and Calgary is 4.54 to 4.12 in expected goals at even strength. And the high danger chances have been exactly the same in every single game at 24-24. So could Calgary win the next 3 games? Absolutely, but it's going to be at the cost of minus 200 for something that through 3 games is basically a coin toss, right? And so we sit in here and we talked about how that's on the series price, we're like Dallas plus 1.5 at plus money, and we are 1 Dallas victory away from getting that. So the question then becomes, do we just keep hammering away on Dallas, or do we take the, we were up 3.5 minus 1, the 2.5 units that we've won on this series, and just sort of hope to get that last win in the next 3 games. Dallas has 3 games to and 2 of which are at home in order to cash our series price. Honestly, like, I get if you want to just keep betting Dallas, but now you see the price come down a little bit. This is one of those series, and there's always 1 or 2 every playoff, where over the course of the series, the underdog gets shorter and shorter and shorter because obviously, first and foremost, they've won 2 games, but the market starts to realize these 2 games were more equal, or these 2 teams were more equal than we thought before the series. But that's something that we did think, fortunately enough. So that's something that we were able to, and be a little bit stubborn after game 1 and come in and be like, nope, Dallas again, plus 205, boom, nailed it. Dallas again, plus 150, boom, nailed it. Right now we're getting into the plus 135s. I understand if you want to sit out game 4, knowing, and I have full respect for this Calgary team, and I'm just sort of quoting you, the idea that these 2 teams are pretty equal. Calgary is, in fact, probably the better team, just not by the way that it was priced. And then you look at the Rangers and the Penguins, and that series is exactly how we thought it was going to sort of play out on the ice, where Igor Shesterkin, if you're betting the Rangers, you're betting on that dude because he is that dude. He is awesome. He had an awesome regular season. But when he is not that dude, when he is not even just mediocre, when he is getting sort of matched by the goaltender on the other side, whether that's Louis Domingue or some other guy coming off the street that might be the next goaltender if Louis Domingue got hurt because the Penguins are on their 3rd goaltender, then you look at the metrics and you go, okay, Pittsburgh's 13.22 to 8.89 in expected goals, 58 to 32 in high danger chances at even strength. Like, that is a team creating way more scoring chances. And it's because of Shesterkin, certainly in those first 2 games. He gets chased in the 3rd game. And I facetiously said, like, Shesterkin, I guess. But the point is like, if you're going to back the Rangers, like, your guy cannot get pulled from a game. Now, the Rangers played actually a very good game. Even in that first period, it was another Leafs Lightning situation where you're looking at the first period going, man, all the pucks went in for Pittsburgh. Like, this must be a blowout. Both teams had basically the same number of high danger chances, had the same number of expected goals. Unfortunately for Shesterkin, he let those goals in on his end, and Louis Domingue didn't. But that's the point. We can go through a small sample size of a period or 2 periods where Louis Domingue can be as good or better than Igor Shesterkin. And I just rather play the consistent 18 skaters in front of a goaltender that I know are going to provide, 58 to 32 in high danger chances. And then I'll just take my chances with that, right? And so, listen, the Rangers could come back. They could win game 2. I always expected a long series. this is a situation where I'm sitting back. I'm not going to play game 4 in the same way that we avoided a loss in game 2 by realizing that the Rangers were probably going to, we talked about the idea of win probability going up after a loss. I think that's probably the situation here with the Rangers. So I don't think there's any value necessarily in the Pens for game 4. I'll be thrilled if they win, because that means they'll be one step closer to cashing the series price and even potentially the -1.5 series line. But you see how those two things are matching up nicely with where we thought they were going before the series started, but in two different ways.
Yeah, the hockey has been riveting, and I got to say, been bang on a lot of these things so far in the first round of the playoffs. Obviously, there's a bunch more hockey stuff going on, but if the people want to kind of find out where a lot of your information is coming from hockey-wise and get some more of your insights, as there's so much going on and so many good series also going on in the NHL, where can the people find that information for you? Get your NHL breakdowns.
Yeah, at MRUS Authentic on Twitter. Everything I do, I retweet through there. Everything that I write over at The Score. So I've got a handful of stuff planned for this week. Obviously, bummed out about the Oilers losing to the Kings last night to even that series. I thought that was going to be Oilers in 5, especially after they absolutely annihilated the Kings in 2 straight games. Right, I thought they found their groove, so to speak. That game much more evenly played than The Score pointed out, but in this case, Jonathan Quick was very good. Minnesota, St. Louis, we got this series we wanted, didn't get the variance that we needed in order to cash a +145 under 5.5 games. Strangely enough, the better team at even strength in that series is 1-3 that series, right? So we got the chaos element. We just had both teams sort of take advantage of said chaos to an equal amount, which is actually kind of an outlier there. And then the Colorado Avalanche and the Nashville Predators are also allegedly playing in a series as well, but we don't need to talk too much about that. So all of that is to say, at MRUS Authentic on Twitter is where you can get much more when it comes to the NHL playoffs.
Appreciate that, my dude. We'll catch up again down the line, man.
Thanks, pal.
And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder, if you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, it stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. Of course, we got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.